This is North Dakota Legislative Review on Prairie Public. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for joining us. Our guest today is Representative Jeremy Olson. He represents Arnegard in the state legislature. He is also the chairman of the North Dakota House Republican Caucus. Thanks for being here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Dave. And second session, it's a lot different than the first.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. What changes have you seen, and how is it different for you?
Well, of course, last session as a freshman, I was didn't know, I was drinking through a fire hose and learning as I went. And it was a bit of a different dynamic from then to this time. This time I've got a little more experience under my belt. Not much. There's a lot of people with a lot more experience, but I've kind of seen things happen once or twice, so I kind of know what to expect a little more. I'm not as surprised as I was last session, so it's a little easier to kind of anticipate what's happening and not be as frustrated when things don't work the way as efficiently as I think they should have as a freshman.
So what is the role of the House caucus leader then?
Well, the way I see it, quite simply, is as the House caucus leader for the majority, my job is to do a lot of the work, a lot of the day-to-day stuff, a lot of the busy work, so that the leader, Representative LaFour, can focus on the big picture items. He's a phenomenal leader. I respect him more than anyone else, but he's one guy. And there's a lot on his plate. Whatever I can do to take that burden off, some of that burden off of him, is my job. I think of it like in military terms. If he's the commander, I'm the command sergeant major. I'm taking care of the logistics, the meetings, training, getting the freshmen taken care of, taking care of this stuff so he could focus on the big tasks.
Plus you have, 96 members?
There are 94 House members, 83 of which are Republicans in the House.
So that's not always easy to herd cats.
Yeah, the other part of it is dealing with a bunch of type A personalities with varying levels of success. So,
since you come from northwestern North Dakota, what are your constituents telling you are their main concerns?
For us, I'm in District 26, which is McKenzie and Dunn counties, primarily in the heart of the Bakken oil field. So, anything that has to do with extraction tax, anything that has to do with the funding. Anything that has to do with energy production and what goes around that is of particular importance, because that's a large part of our counties or our districts' economies is getting the revenue off of that.
And of course, that's a large part of the state's economy as well.
Absolutely. So it's in everybody's best interest to. I still, the term from Chair Hedlund is you feed the golden goose.
Absolutely. And the revenue forecast was a little bit down for oil prices.
Yes.
Are you concerned that there might be a slowdown in the Bakken?
I wouldn't say so much a slowdown. I think our production rate will probably be flat. It won't go up or down too much. The price projection is the price projection. Now, there's a lot of factors that can change that. What's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in other parts of the world can affect the price of oil, since it is a global commodity. This is a best guess, and for the most part, they try to estimate very conservatively. So it's better to under-promise and over-deliver than do the opposite.
On the side of caution, for sure.
Yes, sir.
And you're right, it's a forecast. This is not going to say that's going to happen.
Right.
Who knows, there might be some swings and you just don't know.
The other part is, too, we're trying to forecast 36 months out, 2 years in advance, which is a lot harder to do than 1 year out.
Be that as it may, do you support the idea of going to annual sessions?
I do, yes. For me, and a lot of people in my stage of life that are still working, it's easier for me to justify taking a couple of months off every year versus taking a whole quarter off every couple of years. I had to basically leave my job and come to the legislature, and then hopefully get the job back when we finish up in May. So, for folks that are in earning years, it's a tough ask, and with term limits, you have a smaller pool to draw from because the good ones aren't able to stay as long as they used to.
And that the institutional memory also goes with that.
Absolutely. When this comes through, it gets all cycled out. At one point, you're going to have the most experienced person in the legislature will only have 3 sessions under their belt. As a freshman, I was extremely fortunate because I had a lot of folks with a lot of institutional knowledge guiding me, training me, doing all the things even before the election happened to get me ready. So instead of drinking through a fire hose, it was maybe a garden hose. Who's going to be the old man of the mountain when the most experienced person only has 3 sessions under their belt?
Now
And
that's
that's going to be the
a
challenge.
big question for sure. I wanted to ask something about one big issue that's out there that everybody started talking about before the session: property taxes.
Oh yes.
What's your position on the property tax bill that's going through the legislature right now?
The main one is 1176. That is now in the House Appropriations. There's a couple other ones that are kind of sitting in Senate as well. To be honest, I don't know what's going to happen in the House Appropriations. It came through the House, it passed, it went through the Senate policy, it passed. Now it's in appropriations. I'm sure there's going to be some changes made, probably quite a few, but that's above my pay grade at this point.
But this is one of the big key issues that's going to get the session done, getting a
Yes.
property tax relief and reform bill
Yes.
that's going to be, acceptable to everybody if you can.
Last thing we want is another Measure 4 coming out and taking up a lot of bandwidth for everybody.
Are you hearing from your local cities and counties and towns about the caps?
Not so much. I think they realize, for the most part, I'm hearing from some, but for the most part, they recognize that it has to happen to some extent. Now, what's the right number? Again, I don't know. There's a lot of smarter people than me in appropriations that are doing the math and having those discussions. Having a cap of some sort is absolutely needed.
And of course, the bill as it's written has an out that if a local government needs to raise more money, they can opt out, but it has to take a vote of the people on
Yes.
one of the 2 key voting types, which be general election or primary election.
Right.
From what I understand.
Yeah, and then it would only be good for a certain number of years. I think 4. It might, that might
think
change,
that's right.
but that original is 4. So that's there. Yeah, there is that option. So but the bottom line, it has to go to the vote of the people to do that. So
Besides that, are there any other particular issues that you're watching for Northwest North Dakota?
one actually a big one, 2339. That's a Senate bill. Senator Patton, or no, a Senator. I can't remember which senator, but I'm a co-sponsor on that.
Sure.
But it has to deal with wildfire mitigations. Now, as I was coming here today, I got alerted that there's a wildfire happening in McKenzie County, where I live. You remember last fall, we had probably the worst series of wildfires in recent history, and from that. This bill, as well as a companion bill, which is a study, is meant to try to figure out, okay, how do we we had good response, we had good cooperation. How do we make it better? And for this Senate Bill 2339, it's Senator Kessel. It was let's look at the utility companies, the ones that, if there is a down power line or something like that, and that starts a fire, how can we address that? What kind of plans can they put in place? What can they implement to mitigate mitigate the damage if something like that does happen? So we are in a conference. We are in a subcommittee on energy and natural resources. We had a meeting this morning, and we'll have another one tomorrow. So that's one that's very important to me, because that fire, came within a few miles of my home. It came within a couple miles of the town of Arnegard. So it's and there was some loss of life. There was a lot of animals that was lost, and a lot of crops and hay were destroyed too. So those scars will be there for a while.
And of course, we were looking for maybe some moisture to help. So far, that hasn't materialized over North Dakota.
No, it's been pretty. It's pretty dry out there right now. Unfortunately, we could certainly use a good soaking or a good spring snowstorm to get some of that stuff. Get some moisture back in the ground.
Well, energy, natural resources. I have to ask you about the data centers because that seems to be another, it's not really a top of mind issue, but, I'm hearing a lot of discussion about it.
Yeah, the data centers, think of that, they're large computer banks that take a lot of power and generate a lot of heat. Well, a couple of things we have in Western North Dakota, we have a lot of power through natural gas, so we could, run our own generators, and those things generate a lot of heat and need to be cooled down. Guess what? We got a lot of cold months in the year, so that reduces the need for having to have air conditioning. So you have that natural air conditioning happening, and part of the issue with natural gas in the western side of the state is we're rapidly approaching the point where we won't be able to take away anymore. We're almost full, and at some point they're going to have to pull back on production so they're not flaring. So the more we can offload locally, whether it be through power generation, whether it be through liquefaction, whether it be through data centers, cryptocurrency mining, anything that we can do to use the natural gas there to consume it there, that's less that we have to try to push down pipelines and away.
And you've got the two pending projects to bring natural gas from the Bakken to eastern North Dakota.
Yes, I mean those are, that's absolutely something we would love to do, because think of all the towns along not just Fargo and Grand Forks, but all the towns along the line that are currently running on propane. If they could tap into a natural gas main line, that'd be transformational. Think of a town that could have a manufacturing plant that it's not economical to do it off with propane, but if they had natural gas plumbed in, think of the things they could do.
And that's I want to go back to that point because Bakken oil has natural gas, and there seems to be kind of a ratio that
Yes.
the oil goes down, the natural gas goes up. No wonder you need some way to offload that gas.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There's three parts that when it comes out of the ground, there's three things. There has oil, you have natural gas, and you have produced water, salt water, brine water, what do you call it. You have to separate those out. The production water, that's the waste. We take care of that. The gas, the oil could go on pipelines, it could go on trucks, but the gas has to go on a pipeline. There's no other way for it to be transported. So we either consume it on site with some sort of a data center or crypto mining they can handle it on site, use it in some sort of manufacturing, or use it to generate electricity through turbines. So that's the big part of it, and it is getting gassier. The ratio of oil to gas is getting more gassy as the Bakken ages.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but when you get to that point, if you can't get the gas offloaded, well, you're going to have to cut back on oil production because of the flaring rules.
Correct. Yeah. The oil and gas the production company said they will not, they will not break the flaring rule. So if that means they have to pinch back on their production, that means they have to pinch back on production. That's the last thing we want is to have a decline in production. But that's the challenge. But that's also a challenge, and that we have to overcome is, okay, what are we going to do about it?
So how confident are you that maybe some of these pipeline projects might get going and you might be able to offload some of that gas?
Yeah, I think everybody agrees that needs to happen. I don't see any naysayers that say, hey, we don't need it or we don't want it. The challenge is, I think it's going to happen is going to be with right-of-way access. Everybody wants it, but they don't want it in their backyard. So that, coming from Western North Dakota, there are a lot of wells, there are a lot of pipes, there are a lot of pipelines. People get fatigued with more and more pipelines going through, whether it be water, natural gas, or whatever. So that might have, that would probably be one of the biggest challenges.
Do you have any thoughts about reducing the oil extraction tax for non-Bakken wells?
Yes, I believe we actually were. That was actually, I don't remember the bill number, but that was one of them that we actually looked at. And the idea with that is to encourage exploration outside the core Bakken zone. Maybe the more conventional wells. They're not going to be blowing and going like a typical Bakken well, but it could be profitable. So and it's meant to stimulate more exploration in these areas that are not being explored right now. So if you have a financial incentive for a company to go in there and do it, hey, maybe they might hit the next Bakken zone. Who knows?
They might. And of course, we talk about Bakken and Three Forks
Yes.
mainly, but there are other formations out there. Department of Mineral Resources talks about several other formations that have oil.
Yes.
And one of the challenges that they want to do is see if pipelines will come in and do horizontal drilling in more conventional wells, because horizontal was the key that unlocked the Bakken.
Right. And that's, again, that takes money, that takes capital investment, and how are we going to incentivize it? One of the best ways we could do is provide a tax incentive.
Okay. I have a couple other things on some other subjects.
Yeah.
One thing that has been, and looks like it might finally go forward and might get finally done, the four-laning of Highway 85.
I hope so. 85 is one of the busiest roads in the state. A lot of truck traffic, a lot of white pickups going up and down that road, a lot of agricultural products going up and down that road. Right now it's 4-lane from the Little Missouri Bridge by the North Unit of Theodore Roosevelt Park up through Williston. The next step is to bring it to the Highway 200 intersection, which is over by Grassy Butte, and then ultimately down to Belfield and beyond.
So that's part of that whole idea of a Theodore Roosevelt Expressway too.
Yes, it is, and it is having a 4-lane makes things a lot safer. When you have a big convoy of a workover rig and all the ancillary vehicles following it, they go kind of slow, and you know what? People get a little antsy, and they take some risk and try to pass it, and then that's how some incidents happen.
That 3-lane idea worked for a while, but that doesn't solve the problem.
No, it doesn't solve the problem. It was a Band-Aid on a sucking chest wound, but the 4-laning is the answer to it.
So what about other infrastructure projects? And I'm thinking that one of the things that's happening with water is NAWS.
Yes.
And you're going to benefit from NAWS. I think.
NAWS and WAS. Yeah, the NAWS, that's going up to the Minot area. It's carrying a lot of fresh water up there. In my area, we have the Southwest Water.
You do?
And as well as the Western Area Water Supply. So those projects are bringing water to areas that you would never have thought that would ever get water. I mean, think of some areas in Western North Dakota were the last ones to get telephone service, hardline telephone service in the 1970s. They're now, I spent part of my job last summer was going out and staking out and prepping the area to put in drinking water lines with the Western Area Water Supply. These areas that are so remote are going to get fresh water, and again, it comes back to the treasure that we're extracting from the Bakken is paying for that, is bringing quality of life to a lot of people.
Yeah, I was talking to the people at the Water Commission, the water quality people, and they said, yeah, we got this big project that they want to get these things done as soon as they could, and maybe they'll make some progress this year.
Yes, that fund is funded by oil and gas, so that's part of it. But also the challenge is with the reduction in the forecast, that's also going to affect that too. So the challenging thing about having a 1 or 2 industry state is, it's hard to recover when one goes down. There's not a lot of other things to balance it out. That's why, as a state, we're looking for different industries. Okay, hey, at some point, oil is going to peter off a little bit now. If it's a 1 industry or a 2 industry state, that's a big deal. But over the next dozen years or so, if we get a dozen big industries, one dipping is not going to be a big deal for us. We have other industries that will take up the slack.
Yeah, the applied digitals might be one of those too. So.
Aviation, unmanned aerial vehicles, rare earth mineral mining. All sorts of things that we wouldn't have thought about a dozen years ago that are becoming realities now. And these are things that we have to work on in order to, be ready to capitalize them in a dozen years.
I'm fascinated by rare earth minerals. I've been watching some of the things the Geological Survey's been doing, and yeah, there seems to be an opportunity there for North Dakota.
Well, that too. I mean, China controls probably about 90%. That's the last thing I heard, about 90% of the world's rare earth minerals, and we have the opportunity, and we have them here in North Dakota. Now, the great thing about the EERC is that's our research and development arm of North Dakota, and they found ways to extract them through our coal, through the oil and gas processing, or the waste processing of that. Now it's a question of, okay, how do we make it economical? And again, that's what we invest in the EERC to do, is to find those answers, to find the next thing that's going to sustain our economy and bring jobs and make us less reliant on one or two industries.
And we do have lignite coal, and that's been shown to be a pretty good source for those.
Yes, it has.
I have to ask you about one question about financing.
Okay.
Is bonding still being talked about?
It is. Now there is maybe a philosophical disagreement between different parts of the leadership on whether or not to use or not, but it's a tool. Mm-hmm. Like everything else, it's a tool. Let's use it if it's appropriate. It may not be appropriate for all things, but for some things, like water projects perhaps, that go on for several years, that might be a very appropriate tool. So I think it's something that probably will be, it's going to be talked about, and hopefully it'll be implemented in one way or the other.
Can you do it for a state hospital, for example?
Honestly, I haven't been tracking that that particular project. I think it would be good because that's a long-term project. So I think that would be one of the appropriate ways to use bonding. But again, that's above my pay grade at this point. So I'm going to stay in my lane.
Absolutely. But there are some things that are going on. But North Dakota, and I'm hearing it from you, North Dakota has a lot of advantages. There are a lot of things that are happening in North Dakota that if we can unlock the key, so to speak, that's what
brought people like me back home to North Dakota. I mean, I left after high school, went the military route, and 19 years later came back for the energy industry. Unlocking those keys and bringing those opportunities is what brought people like me and classmates of mine back home that would never have returned to North Dakota otherwise.
But bonding is possible for water projects too if you need it.
I think so. Yeah.
Again,
it's a tool.
That's right. The Legacy Fund is there, and we can use the profits from the Legacy Fund. That helps. You've got a Bank of North Dakota.
Yes.
And you can leverage that, and they're already starting to do that. Some of the legislators.
Just think of it: the Bank of North Dakota. How unique is that as a tool for the legislature and for the state to use to manage its finances? It would never be established in today, but the fact that we had it and when it was established, and we have it as a great tool to use. Think of that. No other state has that.
We just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on some other subjects. 85 mile per hour speed limit, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. The idea of maybe going a little bit heavier on some of the fines, speeding fines.
Also yes.
And especially in construction zones.
Absolutely.
And we talked about the idea of maybe going to annual sessions. Do you like an idea of one session for policy and one session for appropriations, or some kind of thing?
That's how South Dakota does it. I think it might be a good model to look at. I don't know. I would think something like that. We can use the time we have and focus in, kind of narrow the focus on one thing or the other. South Dakota seems to have a good grasp of it. They seem to be successful with it. So why not give that a shot?
Are there any other particular issues that are on your radar right now?
For me, one that I'm working on is House Bill 1169. That's one that I'm a prime sponsor of. I only sponsored 4 bills this session, and 2 of them were because of constituents. So the 2 that I brought in were veteran-oriented bills, and this is 1169 is a veteran-oriented bill. Geared towards disabled veterans. I'm a disabled veteran. and often as time goes on, a disabled veteran, that sometimes their conditions worsen, and they apply to get a increase in their disability rating. And dealing with the VA, it can be arduous. Getting the paperwork done could be time consuming. Now, we have phenomenal veteran services officers at the county level and at the state level. There's a lot of services available that are free. But often often there could be it could be a wait. You could be in the queue for a while.
Sure.
There are other companies out there that do it for a fee. Now there are good ones and there are bad ones. I call them I jokingly call it the anti-shark bill, because there are some very ethical companies run by veterans that are going to help the veteran put their paperwork together, get everything together. All right, you send out the VA, the clock starts. And then there's the unethical ones that will try to get fees up front and all that. So it's trying to put a box around it.
And speaking of clock, we have run out of time.
All right.
But thank you for your time today.
My pleasure to be here.
Our guest today, Representative Jeremy Olson. He's from Arnegard, North Dakota. I'm Dave Thompson with Prairie Public.